Hi, my name's Steve Warburton. My connection with Gallipoli is that I've been able to research the diaries and letters of my wife's grandfather, who fought on the peninsula all the way through the campaign.
And who was he?
He was Brigadier General Cuthbert Henry Tyndall Lucas. He'd been a regular soldier since 1898, and he started the campaign as a major, and by the end he was a temporary Brigadier General in charge of a brigade. Yes, he had 9 months on the peninsula. He was one of only 14 officers from the 29th Division who managed to survive the entire 9 months on the peninsula and to stay fighting and not be evacuated, wounded, sick. So he wrote every day, sometimes just a few words, sometimes up to 900 words. And he tried to write home to his mother every Sunday, which was apparently a habit that he'd learnt in boarding school.
Yeah. What kind of things was he saying?
Well, when he was writing to his mother, he'd include some detail about what was happening in terms of the campaign, how difficult it was. A couple of times he describes it was far more difficult than the Western Front, which he'd fought on during 1914. At other times, he starts talking about the wild flowers that he can see around him on the peninsula, or he's complaining about the flies, yes. Or asking people to send fly papers, or more chocolate, or cool underwear, or warm underwear, or a new overcoat, or a replacement for the camera that had been destroyed in an artillery bombardment.
So what do you think it's telling us about what he was like as a person? Do you get that kind of feeling at all?
Well, from the diaries and the letters, I've been surprised about how unemotional he was about many of the things that were happening. For example, his brigade lost 50% of its officers in the first few weeks. He just notes that down and moves on to talk about other things. He's very practical. He'll talk about practical things rather than theorising about what's gone wrong. He'll deal with the very nitty-gritty of what was in front of him.
Do you think this was something to do with him as a character anyway, or do you think he was in some way brought up to be like this as an officer?
I think all of those things. I think there was very much, he was a regular armour officer. He'd been in the army for more than 15 years by the time the war started. He'd been in the Boer War, he'd been to Egypt, Sudan, India. So he dealt with a wide range of situations already. There's a story in one of his diaries in 1906, I think it is, where he, on a hunting expedition, he managed to shoot off his finger on his right hand, and yet phlegmatically carries on and seems to enjoy the experience almost and celebrate it. There's even I've even got a photograph of his the X-ray of his finger, or missing finger. And later after the war, he was captured by the IRA and managed to escape in 1920. So he was someone who was very adept at making the best of the situation that he found himself in.
He was a bit of a boy's own Biggles kind of guy.
A bit of a hero, I think, definitely, but not the sort of person who would push himself or celebrate himself.
Yeah, so what would you say were the kind of what would you say were the high points of the stories that he told about his time in Gallipoli?
I think in some ways that the high points could be almost the low points. He talked in far more detail about, in his diary, for example, about the attack on Scimitar Hill in August 1915, where of the 4 battalions that he led into action on that day, 3 lost. Either killed or wounded over 60% of their strength on that day. And he writes glowingly about the bravery of individual officers and of the men, but rounds it off saying that the progress that they made didn't seem worth the lives that were lost.
So you think by the end he was a bit disillusioned, or does it go back to the point you made about him just being, oh, okay, let's move on?
I think he accepted the reality of warfare, and that to make progress was going to be costly. He'd been on the Western Front. He knew what the price would be in winning yards in terms of trench warfare. So I think for him it was no surprise, but it was still a matter of regret.
Yes. And what sort of personal comments do you get going between him and his mum, or did he again keep it fairly distant?
Some personal comments. He's very concerned about the fact she's got toothache and it's unrelieved, and he hopes it's better. He's upset about the fact that he misses his younger sister's wedding during the summer, so he's looking forward to seeing the photographs. He also wants to make sure that his father has invested a cheque for £200 that he sent to him in worthwhile stocks and shares.
Yes. And in the end, you say he went through pretty well from beginning to end of the campaign.
Yes.
What was it? Did he describe the evacuation at all, and how things went at the last points, and his feelings of kind of calling an end to the campaign, giving up on it?
There's not much sense of acknowledging something momentous that had happened in terms of the evacuation. He just said the 87th Brigade got away all right with no casualties.
That was it.
And that was it. And then he moves on to talk about, the next diary entry is the journey back to Alexandria and
yes.
The rest and refitting that was able to be done before they were shipped back to England, and he ended up commanding the brigade on the first day of the Somme, and again losing 60% of the strength in.
So you don't think that the war as a whole had a major detrimental effect on him, as we often hear about for so many others?
I think for him it was his job.
Yes.
It's what he knew he had been preparing for 15 years. He felt, I think, that he had to do his job as professionally as he possibly could. His job was to achieve the objectives, but also to not do that at the expense of too many men lost.